I'm trying to do what I want. And I get good grades, that's why I wear these hats ways. These people recognize, that's why they stay up in my face.
Hey. So check that volume real quick on that thing, BK. Cut it down a little bit.
Can't
On
be
your,
mine.
you don't think it's yours?
I don't believe so because I'm on a cell phone, so I don't really have no audio essentially.
It don't matter. We'll get over. All right. So man, objectively aggressive. Here we go again. You don't never ever know when we're gonna pop up, and we late. But guess what? We got it together. We'll get it together. What we doing here? We talking about what's in your wallet today. And today, I got a special guest, and hopefully stay around for a good long time. We all know Dr. Ham. So what's up? What's up, Ham?
Hey man,
Doctor?
hey man, pleasure to be with you, man. Uh, taking it one day at a time.
That's all we can do. That's all we can do. Thank you for joining me again. And I want to introduce, so I guess for the ladies, nah, man, eligible bachelor here, former Marine, always a friend of mine for more times than I can think, longer than I've known, double my life, known him since I was 14. Stand-up guy. I want to be here. Brad, BK, Boo, everything I call them. But what's up, man? How you living?
What's up, Calvin? Thank you for inviting me to your platform, man. Good evening, Dr. Ham. Um, I'm just glad to be here, and I want to correct you, man. Known you since you was 12.
Yeah, you were 14.
Yeah,
My bad.
yeah. But yeah, I've got a long history with Mr. Calvin here, and I'm hoping that I can shed some light on the topic tonight from my point of view.
Oh, for sure, man. It's all about perspective, man. That's what we're doing here. And tonight, we're talking about what's in your wallet, but I mean, the elephant in the room right now, for what it's worth, we all we talk about race, and we like to get really deep in a lot of different subjects. But I've always wanted to bring a different perspective here. And when I say different perspective, just even somebody who looks different to know that there is a difference. And I've known you so long, and we trust each other with so much stuff. And it's not even, this is not a loaded conversation, because if there was a fly on the wall with me and you talk, we would murder that fly, now wouldn't we?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Hey, look, I'm not going to admit to any kind of murder online, especially on no live Facebook. But let's just say that fly might end up with a couple of bruises. He might have slipped off the curb.
Right. But one of the things that I want to get into, I want to have a sweet serenade. We're gonna talk about race cars, man. So what's in your wallet is your race car, because sometimes it gets pulled, right? And for good and for bad reasons, but we got to use it. And I want you to be here, not just as an inaugural of us, bringing a different perspective because of the tone of your skin, but not because of your attitude or disposition. It's trying to merge a couple of worlds, but always get after this knowledge, right? So the sweet serenade is, we're gonna talk about black cars, white cars, race cars. And what we really want to talk about for real is, I understand that I came up in a world of privilege, that my mom had me in certain places that when I look back, that a lot of people weren't doing that. And guess what? Now I have somebody to speak to some of this stuff, to what I come from, regardless of what anybody can say. Like, you have always called it, like you've seen it since I was 12. Man, I thought you might have slapped the property manager one time. I don't know. But the day, we had people.
That's an allegation. Let's clarify that for the record that is an allegation. And when somebody please look up what's the limit? What's the limit on that particular activity? Yeah, what's the
statutory limitations? No, man, that's so old. But what I'm saying is, you always keep it real, man. Like you'll keep like you posted on here, like if you said like that's bullshit, whatever. So you keep it real. So I want you to keep it real in your perspective. So the sweet serenade is to the black cars and white cars. We know they get used, but we know that people have different lives and they get affected different ways by race and by experience, right? Like you can have a whole just experience that makes you different from other people, and that has nothing to do with race. But
so
be separated.
So I guess if I had any input on that right now, the first input I would be to let everybody know that my perception of race is we are all one race. We are all the human race. We're all just from different parts of where humans have infiltrated the world. Race is another tool used in division of our power and our unity as individuals. For us to actually work on one accord and accomplish, some of those true successful opportunities in life, man, to just tear down all the things that we use to make ourselves feel better than one another. At the end of the day, man, we are all the same, man. You can't go to an emergency room after being shot and request a certain type color blood. You can't say you want white blood or black blood or Arabic blood or Indian blood. You're going to go to that hospital and they're going to give you blood. And that's because we're all the same, Racism is fueled by classism. Everybody wants to be the king. Nobody wants to be the slave, So everybody wants to be the man. Everybody wants all the opportunities. And I don't think that is without, excuse me, I'm going to say without. I'm going to say that there's anybody in any particular ethnicity or color identification that doesn't want to be the king. Nobody's desire is to be at the bottom of the totem pole.
Oh, this is a good handoff. All right.
So
hold on. We gotta get this to the doc right quick, BK. Go ahead, run with it.
When you say race card, the first thing that comes to my mind is a game, because you got cards in a game. And I just want to make it a clear point that, black people in America invented no games of race. We invented no games of race. And I think that when you start talking about how race is played, there is the idea and then there's the reality. So I agree with everything he said, ideally. That is true. If they dig your bones up, they ain't going to be able to tell if it was black or white without measuring the skull and all those other features. And when we talk about race, I think that the idea of weaponizing race is to his point. Race was weaponized for division, control, and only thing I would add is there's an intersectionality between race and class.
Hold on, Doc. I'm sorry. Where is that reverb? We gotta pause because I don't like the reverb, and you're getting deep. All right, can you hear your own echo?
A little bit, but it's faint.
Okay,
it's faint.
But I haven't got a text to say it was annoying, so go ahead.
But when you start talking about intersectionality between how does class and race come together, because I think that's where a lot of the challenges are, is that you can be rich and black and not deal with some of the problems that a poor black person will have to deal with, because you're
only if you're in the right location. Because if you find yourself rich and black in a sundown town, then guess what? You're now faced to have to deal with all of that somebody else may deal with. You can't. Nothing we say today is going to take racism away. Racism is an institute of control that was disproportionately placed on black people in this country. There's no way around it. Period. even still to this day, with as much success as black people in civil rights arguments and fights have made, we still live in a disproportionate system that was designed for white people. All right. And then you have the structure of white women and black men, or excuse me, white men and white women, and how the white man has a higher hierarchy than the white woman in their structure, right? And that's kind of like understood or portrayed as understood across all ethnicities and races. Like they say that the woman is the second most feeble creature to man. That even in religion, it's preached that women are given our helpers. But the truth of the matter is that men and women are different. I think those differences that men and women have are also shared with differences that races have because of what is the norm. What is the norm in your race, right? Like if you're raised in a black home, you're raised in a white home, you have some norms. If you're raised around all women, you're raised around all men, you have some norms. So with that being said, what is your norm, right? Everybody's norm is different. Everybody experiences race different. Everybody's been exposed to different types of racism, whether systematic, institutional. Racism is such an overbearing principle in our life. And it's something that they don't allow us to really talk about, right?
So let me pick it up for you, and I hopefully the reverb is not as bad. So I agree with you. And so as we talk about the classism, tribalism, racism thing, right? Like racism is a baked in like experience, but it's compacted with like xenophobia, classism, the tribalism, because black people can't be racist to white people, right?
Yes,
because
they can.
No. Systematically, and we can
systematically. Okay.
Systematically, a black person.
Okay, and I'm sorry, that's prejudice, not racist.
Yeah.
To be racist, we can be highly prejudiced and make it feel racist.
Correct. Prejudice. Correct.
And I know you know that. And we on camera, off camera, we understand a lot of different dynamics and how that work in being the minority and majority in different situations. But at the end of the day, it's still oppression, right? Because if a white person gets caught in a situation where there's only black people and they're the only white one, we know we've seen that, right? And that's a situation where maybe they take advantage of it. But at the end of the day, it was more of an opportunity that might have had sprinkles of revenge, but it wasn't about, oh, let's string this white boy up because we don't like white people. It's like, hey, he probably got some money and da-da-da, so we're gonna knock him across the head because he's an easy target.
So I can attest to that, absolutely. You know what I mean? Like even as recently as last year when I went to the local NSU homecoming, you know what I'm saying? The homecoming, the vibe in the homecoming, the dynamic changed once the lights went down, the crowd changed. There was a lot of older alumni during the day, and then toward the evening it was the younger crowd. And of course, NSU is a historically black college, and of course I was out there by myself. I was out there with some friends, but they had moved on. And so you know, that changes. Even as an 18-year-old white man in Grambling, Louisiana, hanging with the cute dolls at the Renaissance, you know, watching them come through, you know, I was perceived as different in those environments. Still to this day, in the current environment I live in, you know, like you see me, I look cool, I'm chilling, you know, I'm a 43-year-old white man. So you have to understand that your perception is whatever somebody else perceives. So a lot of people will never get the luxury of getting to know who I am. And that's just because I'll never take the time to speak to certain people. You know, I think that concept has a lot to do with racism too, because people have already determined in their mind, they think that a person of this color is somebody that they can't gather anything positive from. Speaking to them will do them no good. you have that on both sides of the spectrum. There are black people who choose, I don't talk to white people. I don't deal with white people. I've seen that. And then I've also seen where white people say the same thing. We always joke about how the white woman clutches her purse, right, when the black man walks up or locks her door or something like that. But we make judgments as people about people. Who are we going to deal with this person? And sometimes it's laziness that allows people to make a blanket decision to say, hey, I've had a bad experience with somebody of this type. I'm not going to deal with that person anymore. And so all of that shit helps fund racism, right? But the key to what I was saying earlier and what I think that we need to build this off of is that everybody experiences racism differently.
Okay. Doc.
No, I don't know that we can really define the card. But I think, what I mean? Like what's in your wallet? Because what's in your wallet determines or depends on how you've experienced racism in your life. So I guess, have you experienced racism in the Air Force?
Oh, you tell me?
Either one of you, both of you.
Doc, is your go?
Yeah, so I think of it as a little different. I think of racism as being centering. I think of it as being centered on centering. Centering. So, like, as a black person in America, it's hard to be unapologetic, uncompromising, because I think one of the cards that when you're black is to assimilate into the culture, to do the things that will get you success in our system. And one of those things you have to do is you have to be first non-threatening to the establishment of power. And if you are a person who will buck the system, and if you're black, you're going to see a pushback that you might not see if you didn't have the same color hue.
Which is the principle of Martin Luther King. Go ahead.
But to your point, I think that one of the challenges that we see is that when you say white to me, my first thought is, what do you mean? Because you're not necessarily white as a color, but what European nationality do you come from? Are you British? Are you Scottish? Are you Italian? Are you Polish? Because when you identify with white, you are identifying with a system that was designed for oppression. So I say, for example, I don't think black is just a color. Black is also a condition. It's a condition that some people who have a certain hue have to go through that others don't have to go through, not because you're poor, not because you are come from a different background. It's the status that you have because you are in a system that is predominantly centered around whiteness, meaning whiteness as property, meaning when you're white, you possess something that a black person doesn't have. For example, you wouldn't need a civil rights movement if you were a citizen. Citizens don't have to fight for rights. You only have to fight for rights if you are a non-citizen. And one of the things that we have to have is that you cannot deconstruct anything if you don't know how it was constructed. You have to know how it was built. And it wasn't just built off of this premise that we are a different skin color, because there also had to be some psychological things that were associated with your color. Meaning you were inferior, and not just because you have a color that's different in mine, it's the mentality that you were expected to have to uphold the system. For example, one way that racism stays in power as long as it has is by taking the viewpoint of the individual and not the system. Meaning, what can I do as an individual in a system of racism, or it's intractable? I can't fix anything at my level on the system perspective. And I think that mentality lets us to individualize racism and not to me and you have the same concern. So let's put our other interests aside and focus on this issue. And I think that creates division, because we have to center the issue on injustice, inequality, and not on if I like you or don't like you. Because I don't really care if someone likes me. My concern is, do you have power with that dislike to prohibit me from doing things that you won't prohibit others from doing? And I think that's part of that battle of the status quo not being challenged because of things like privilege, or like when you get pulled over by the police, are you afraid for your life? Do you have to explain to your children how to behave a certain way when a cop pulls you over, because you don't have a fear that I'm going to end up like fill in blank name of person who was extrajudicially killed by the police? And I think that is a dynamic that some people don't understand, that perspective, because they're not burdened with that problem.
I agree. You know, and so as we talk about the race cards in this particular Where's Your Wallet segment, you know, I want to talk about, do they have limits? And they do. And the limits, I mean, because even if we talk about the analogy and the innuendo, double entendre of the black card is synonymous with having no limits, right? But to have a black card is to be black and have it taken from you if it's appeared to be the wrong thing at the wrong time, right? Right? Like, don't know how to cook, oh, your black card can get taken, right? If you don't know how to act properly in front of, you know, people who are not black, it can get taken regardless of what. So it's like, okay, are there limits to your cards? Who has the cards? We all got different cards, because just like you said, whiteness is actually not about being white. That's more about the power structure, because in 1920 and before, they made it, hey, it was all Europeans before that, because we know who was the N-word before black people were really where they talk about Irish being that, right? So we know that there was a transformation from ethnicity focus, classism, because this nation was brought up on immigration, meaning this was a free land and everybody kind of had, you know, free will on it until people feel like they wanted to take it for their own. And we know who that was, right? There was a recent conversation about Meghan Markle being surprised or gassed about living with the royal family and all these questions that are actually typical questions, but they're coming from the original colonizers. Come on now. We thought we were talking to smart people. But I'm not saying she's not smart. It's just not system thinking. And so as we segue to what's the difference, man? I mean, like, what's the difference between those two cards? Where do they get you? Like, what access do they have? Like, BK, do you feel like you can do certain things with who you look like, what you look like?
I didn't hear the last.
Like Steven Seagal, right?
I didn't hear your question. So
I was just messing around. Like, you remember Steven Seagal, man? Like, sometimes you can just look like people and get away with stuff, but when you're white or white looking or of a certain skin tone, do you have privilege with
that? So my response is I've been looking for my white card my whole life. Like, I'm trying to find it. They say it's a white privilege card out here. I want to find it. I think that a lot of that is also personality based. Kalvin, you're much darker than I am, and you have been way more successful in a white environment than I was. Not to say that you are any less than me or any more than me. We have both made decisions in life of who we are and how we think, and our thought process and our ability to process thoughts and our ability to react. Personally, I've never experienced a white card. And personally, every time I've been pulled over, I was worried about getting shot. I've actually been pulled out by the police, slammed on the ground, beat up, you know what I'm saying? I've experienced that. So I may have a different experience of racism than other people have. That's why at the beginning, I tried to point to you all that everybody experiences racism a different way, especially with me being previously married to black women. You know, when me and my black woman would walk out in public, you know what I'm saying, we would get hate from everybody, not just one entity. The black man, the black woman had their own reasons for hating on our relationship. The white man, the white woman, they had their own relationship issues. So it's hard for me to, I guess, come and represent white people tonight because
it's not you.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have the same experience.
You better own it.
My black card is stronger than my white card, so like I may not be the right guest tonight to represent for the white people, but I can absolutely agree with you, man, that we have a problem, and I don't know if we do ourselves any justice by talking about what the problem is or identifying the problem, because that's the same conversation that's been going on for over 50 years. I think it's really, what's the solution, right? Like, what do we truly do to resolve racism? And I mean, we've made leaps and bounds. Whether you believe in the presidency as it being a real entity and division of this country, or you think it's a puppet, we had a black president. Whether that was politically motivated or that truly shows change in this country, it's an accomplishment, right? I've known people from the hood, lived their hood life their whole life, and have changed their life and become successful. So I think it really does depend on decision making, because we're all affected by racism, in our own ways. And I've learned a lot from experiencing some of those things. I've learned a lot about how that system really works. I've dealt with the court systems and got the same short end of the stick that, the majority of the African American populace that goes to a court system goes through and deals with. So how do we solve it? How do we solve racism? Is really the question that I would try to plant as a seed in people's minds. And what do we do? What do the three of us do? I know that we have no problems with race, dealing with one another, but how do we help others to think about what's the solution for solving it? You know what I mean? To take it out of the system, to remove it from our lives.
Doc.
Well, if you think of it like a cake, you can't take the egg out of the cake once it's been baked. So either you bake a new cake, a new cake, or you essentially try to doctor up the one you currently have. I think that it starts with an acknowledgement. I can't fix a problem if I don't acknowledge it. And when I say acknowledge, I don't mean to say, oh, look at this systemic racism. I'm talking about, when you say privilege, I think that there is something that people talk about. Racism is not necessarily about hindering people. So I think there's a comparative analysis to say, well, I haven't had the struggles that so-and-so had, so therefore it does not invalidate anybody's concern. I think what has to first start to happen is that we tell the story, and the story has not been told. The story has not been told. And I think that that's why there's so many efforts to prohibit the sharing of our stories. Because if we share our stories together, we will see that we do have more commonalities and differences. But we don't share our stories because, think of it this way, 75% of white people in America don't live around or know any black people. Think about that. They don't have to engage or interact with any of them because they live in areas that are predominantly white. And so it's called social learning theory. You learn how to behave and act by the society that you are around. And so there had to be arguments that were used to support racism. My thought process is you have to deconstruct the argument first. So, for example, the idea that you were inferior or that you are superior based off of your color is a faulty ideology. That ideology is faulty. However, it's still supported because people point to, well, look at the crime statistics. You got more black people committing crime. And I say, listen, before 1930, crime statistics in America were itemized by European nationality. There wasn't a category of white. If it was German, it was itemized. But then they said that this causes division. So they said, let's remove European nationality from the crime statistic and just put white. But when they did that, what it created is a system where now we can look at data and say, well, look, there are more black people doing this. I told you, and that can support my analysis that, look, they are more criminal, they're more deviant, they are more blah, 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 blah. And it can gloss over the concerns of other communities by not singling. I can't point to say, well, look at the Italians before we made the decision. They were doing a lot of felonies. And the Irish were pickpocketing and criminal. And when I put people into what is called the ghetto, and I put people in population dense areas, there's going to be more crime. If you study the history of Europe, they were just killing each other. Seriously, the English was killing each other because they had classism. And so when you put people in these environments and you deprive them of economic opportunities, you're going to create a hierarchical system. And I think there's a concern that what goes on in one community does not affect the other. But if you go back to the Kerner Commission report 67, they said, listen, the ghetto was made by white folks, it's sustained by white folks. This is the government saying this. And so when you start talking about deconstructing this, we first have to even acknowledge that there were structural systems. This is critical race theory. There were structural systems that were built in this country for the purpose of black supremacy, of white supremacy over black folks. Perfect example, I'm in the military, the GI Bill. When the GI Bill first came out, black people couldn't use it. They couldn't go to school. So when you don't let people go to school, I'm only the second generation of people who actually probably used their GI Bill to get a PhD. And you think about where would we have been right now if you had black people who had access to these educations 60 years ago? We wouldn't be fighting some of the same problems we're fighting today because we cannot refute their argument unless we can get into the room. If I don't get into the room where the decision is being made, I can't affect the policy. Like the expression, if you're in a meeting and you're talking about people from one particular race and nobody from that race is in the room when you're discussing that meeting, it's already structurally, you're not going to get the context. And I think that's a decolonization mindset, because the colonization mindset is who built the table, what was the table built for them, and who is excluded from it. And I think until we have that conversation, we're going to have this circle jerk of this individual did this thing wrong, because the term racist has become so poison that nobody wants to be called it. And that this is the only word where you can self-identify as not being it. You can self-identify, like there is no objectable standard of what is racist. If you call a black person an N-word, all you gotta say is, oh, I'm not a racist. Well, wait a minute, what is the standard? Because when you start to talk about this idea of what is or is not a racist, the white-centeredness can tell you that I'm not it. And I'm saying that you don't get to determine if you are or if you are not it, because the people who are affected by it tend to be able to point it out better than those who may not be affected.
You gonna pop your collar on that one or what?
What happened?
You got to, man.
I'm collar free.
It don't matter, man. You can dust it off. I mean, that was smoking. Hey, we gotta. So there was actually a question that came through from Kirk Davies, who's actually a former boss of mine, commandant, very, very Renaissance man. Salute. His question, he said, a few years ago, I read Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson.
Yep.
Her premise is that the U.S. has a caste system. Her explanation of this premise is very compelling. Are you familiar with her book? If so, I'd be interested in your thoughts on it. Hold that thought real quick. Simmer on it real quick, Doc. What I want to say about that is, yes, I have not read this book, but the caste system makes sense. So when I think of whiteness is made up, but is actually rooted in success, quote unquote, and power, quote unquote, which sits juxtaposition to salvation. The thought is that, or what was taught is that the struggle, it is what's needed to make the soul grow. However, the world that we live in allows us to experience that, but does not allow us the pressure valve spiritually to express how we need to live and where we need to be, which is in reverence, like reverence and power, right? It's all about respect and eternal power, because we just want our personalities fed, because we can't even live a simple life where we get, delicious fruits and vegetables at a decent price. And that's for any complexion. You got to make the money to even feel psychologically safe, right? But to talk about psychological safety is to talk about inclusion, learning, collaboration, and the ability to challenge. Yeah. When you look a certain type of way, that's automatically limited. When you don't have the resources, you can't even learn. So you're talking about inclusion and learning already. When you don't have the acumen to be a contributor, what's the point? And you better not challenge because you'll get killed. You just talk about Europeans. You just talk about what that life was. It's a survival life, right? There's two forms of life, and it doubles up like compound interest. You gotta go through life, and then you can start living. You have to survive before you can live. But for some reason, God asked the universe to put us through these things all the time, but we got to learn all these different life lessons. And sometimes you got to learn them again and again because you don't learn it the first time. If we don't learn history, we're bound to repeat it. Hell, we couldn't even learn history properly when the GI Bill was being offered, and they was excluding that from us, as well as they were excluding the housing districts to us, because guess what? That was a veteran thing that we didn't have access to. That's instant wealth. And we can see it now. If I try to sell my house now, I want 200,000, but it makes more sense to keep it. Why? Because you got to play the long game. Guess who doesn't know how to play the long game? Because you ain't never had the game to play. BK, what you think about that, man?
My response, man, would be, there's a lot of people out there that don't know how to play the game, man. There's a lot of poor people, man. Again, man, I'm going to stand on the fact that racism is fueled by classism. You know what I'm saying? Classism is disguised as racism. We use racism to divide us, man. And that's because the system was built on slavery, and as ugly and as gruesome as slavery is and was, you know what I'm saying? There's no way for us to change that history. The system was definitely built against Black people, even still to this day. You know what I mean? And as a quote unquote white person, right? You know what I mean? I was all of those nationalities that you mentioned. It's funny you was talking about Italian and Irish and all that, because my background is all of that. You know what I'm saying? I am Italian. So, white is a color, Black is a color. You know what I mean? You can't really find those colors. It's something it's like a scapegoat, right? Because no one really knows their true identity. You got those DNA tests, and then I guess they're close. But do you have your elders anymore? Life has changed so much, man. When we had families, man, we had people. We had grandparents. We used to learn from them. You know what I'm saying? So now society has changed so much. So racism has also evolved. So now is the same racism going on now that we're talking about? Because we're talking about our experiences, right? Yes. You have your own experiences, and that's what we're talking about. But these kids now, it's a different world for them. And most of these kids are biracial. Like my son is biracial, both of them are, and they have a totally different experience than I have, even now. So it's confusing to try to put racism in a box, because there's no one real way to identify where the problem lies. I think the best thing we can do as a people, man, is just really see people for who they are, regardless of what color is and what, you've been told to go against. But that doesn't change the system. You know what I mean? Again, I'm gonna go back. Like, how do we change the system? You know what I mean? How do we educate more people on, stepping up and being involved with the roles that need to be in, so that we can make a true change with institutional racism,
Okay.
And we have people with all these different backgrounds and all these different experiences. How do we really affect change? And I'm gonna always stem back to that, because I think we do ourselves a disservice by just identifying that we have problems with racism. You know, we know there's a systematic racism problem. It's been there for years. We are doing, as a people, as a nation, we are doing better at making those changes, but we haven't eradicated it. And that's why we're having this conversation tonight. You know, so I think, what's the next step? You know, what do you think that we as a people, as a society, need to do or change? What focus shift needs to happen to kind of like really make that happen, you know, to change racism, to change the way people feel about it?
Yeah.
See, I don't think the goal is to change racism. I think the goal is to outnumber them. I think the goal is to put people who have the ideology of racism, marginalize them. I think it's to put them into a category to say, look, you are the minority. You are the minority and your viewpoints are not valid anymore. And I think there's a disservice we say, so your point about black. Frederick Douglass had a white father. Booker T. Washington had a white father, but none of them were considered biracial. The term biracial is a new term. Before 2000, on the census, you couldn't even select biracial because there was the one drop rule in America. If you had one drop of black blood, you were black. Sorry. And that's how we identified you. So to your point about division, I would say this, that what makes you black is not the color of your skin. It's the condition. And see, some people aren't affected by the condition, to your point. One of the things that I've seen happening is that if you itemize every nationality in America, those who are of a black hue are number two. You got Englanders as number one, those who come from England. And if you took the German population of German descent, they're probably number 3 or 4 because they're done. But if you look at the black people and then if you count the way it was counted from day one, it ain't 40 million of us. But that's part of the system. The system wants me to classify myself as biracial. But the question then becomes, that's new. This is new phenomenology. You were not biracial because if your mother was a slave, you came out of her, you were also a slave by birthright.
By birthright.
And we challenge this ideology that it's to outnumber them. Because to your point, the goal is about power. Classism is a power structure. Racism is in that system of power and division. But when you start to talk about power structures, then you have to deconstruct what the power base is. And so supermajority, supremacy comes from this idea that I can make the laws regarding how you live your life. I have the power to ban teaching your history in my school. That's power. And so when I say outnumber them, because you don't get rid of it, you don't eradicate the ideology, you outnumber them, you marginalize them, and you put them into that camp of Governor Wallace running for president. Yeah, he only won about 4 states. Okay, that's cool. You know, you can have Mississippi, you can have Alabama, you can have Georgia, Louisiana. This is what you're going to win. Because the progressive mentality says that it is not going to be in your interest to be racist. It's not in your self-interest to be racist. So now racism takes a new face. Now it's nice racism. Now it's the argument of, and I'm not calling you out specifically, but the argument of just treat people good is how you perpetuate a system without identifying the root cause. How you treat me is not about racism. It's because you have power to essentially do electoral power. Because I tell people, if voting changed things in America, they would remove it. That's what January 6th was. January 6th was white discontent. It's the people realizing that in 20, 30 years, this country will look dramatically different. And they understand that when they lose political power to enforce their will, they will resort to violence. And how do I know this? Because I know what history says. I know what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, when poor blacks and poor whites got together to form a coalition government. The white supremacists literally killed 200 people, disbanded the government, and was the only successful coup in American history. And that's not changed. The ideology of supremacy has not changed, and they will resort to violence. They will start. There was a couple of days ago, a lawmaker in Tennessee wanted to bring back hanging from a tree. He said we should bring back hanging from a tree. Do you know how psychologically damaging it would be for a black person in America to see a black man hanging from a tree? But this is their thought process. Nothing has changed from them. It's the evolution of racist thought. They said, well, if he would have just complied, he would have been okay. All I hear them saying is if he'd have been a good slave, he wouldn't have got brutalized. That's all I hear. Because when they took their white children to those lynchings, because children went to those, they told their white children, if he would have stayed in his place, if he'd have been a good black boy, he wouldn't have been lynched. If he'd have got off that sidewalk when that white person was coming, if he would have just did what he was told, he would have been okay. And the question then becomes, is this younger generation, the arguments that were used back then have just evolved today. It's the same argument, it's the same ideology, and these are the same people that will murder you because they cannot refute you logically, because it's irrational, it's illogical, and power and might makes right. Because if I can kill you for disagreeing with me, I don't have to make a new argument. And the question then becomes, is we don't marginalize them, we don't form coalitions of like-minded people to say, listen, when Trump called Haiti a shithole country, that's racism. When he said, I want more people to come from Norway, what he was saying was, I want a white ethno state. That America First slogan was what the KKK used in the 1920s. These racists have no new ideas. They are just regurgitating the past and hoping and legislating that their children didn't learn about it. I was telling them, we are teaching our children how to be productive members of society. And the racist white supremacists are teaching their children how to murder ours. We ain't safe. And our children have to be prepared for a world that is going to see a resurgence of violence directed at people who have a certain complexion. When that dude went into that supermarket in Buffalo and started shooting up those black folks, and he got to a white dude and said, oh, sorry, my bad. My question then becomes is, are we going into that household and seeing what his parents taught him, where he got radicalized, why he thought that was okay? When Dylan Roof shot up that church, we're not doing an analysis, and that's twofold. One is that the government of the United States cannot fix this problem because it is infiltrated by people who support white supremacist ideology in politics, in the FBI, in the federal government, and they know it's a problem that they cannot fix. Because when it came to the Black Power movement in the 60s, they shut that down really quick. They shut down the Panthers. They shut down the SNCC. They shut it down. But when it comes to white domestic terrorism in this country, they can't shut it down and they can't infiltrate it because it's already infiltrated them.
Hold on now. Now check this out.
I mean, you crossed a lot of yards in your statement. You know what I mean? It's hard to respond to any one thing at that point. My response, I guess, would be, there's a lot that's gone on. How do we move forward, man? You bring out a lot of points. What do we do as a new generation or as an old generation? Because you guys are probably my age, and we do have a new generation behind us. So how do we change? How do we change things from here? I don't think we've addressed that point. Who do we talk to?
That's a perfect segue for me, though. So please pay attention to my demand. Where would you start? I don't know. Let's start with respect. Respect is a judgment. Respect is a judgment that you have to think about whether you accept the elements of which you see and it matches your mental model, whether you agree with it, or whether you agree with the cognitive biases that line up with what your mind thinks is right. But regardless of what, you have a personality, and your personality wants to be fed, and respect is how it comes. Respect is an external power, but it's still a power that God actually gives us, and He gives us a chance to give it back to Him, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, whose world is it? It's your world, right? Whose world is this? The world is yours. Who gave it to you? That's for you to decide, right? I know who gave it to you, but I can't tell you what to do. But you ask what we do. Look, man, this world is built on leverage, rationale, love, submission, logic, passion, fear, emotion. If you look at where the body lies, it lies in vulnerability. If you look at where the mind lies, it lies in a threat. You see that emotion and fear lie in the mind. You see that love and submission lie in the body. You see that down at the bottom, it says opportunity, passion, logic, character. And you see at the top where it says observe God's strength. You see HP, that's habits and practices. Habits and practices. It lives right there with leverage and rationale. But what you really see is an OODA loop. And an OODA loop is what was taught to us as airmen to understand the dogfighting pilot mentality to make quick decisions in a short amount of time based on training, orientation, all this stuff. But it makes sense because this is what we do. I used to work on planes. I get it, right? A plane is nothing but something taking in multiple inputs and adjusting flight surfaces as it keeps going. This is what we're doing as human beings, though, right? And so we get a chance to be better every single day, but you get that chance every single minute, even in times of struggle. You get a chance to be better, right? The thing about it is when you vibrate higher, you understand this. But to vibrate higher is to understand that, listen, man, we're all on the clock. We're all on the clock. You can punch at any time. And me and you, we've been around long enough to know friends who have punched their clock. At the end of the day, man, just like you said, it's all about decisions that you make. Look at where reverence is. I'm not going to even get real deep, but look at reverence is at 4 o'clock. Authenticity is at 3 o'clock. 2 o'clock is Jesus, man. 1 and 2, the Holy Spirit. Do the thing, man. No blasphemy. This stuff lives. This is what I'm doing. I have a systematic way to tell you from a cause and effect all the way to how you were made, how to make a change. Nobody want to hear that shit. Listen, we can talk about racism. We can talk about all this shit. I can tell you how to do it right now. You can say, oh, you drinking. I'm drinking because I'm retired and I can do it. Because I made the right decisions to be able to do the shit. Regardless of what, nobody's perfect. But if we do it with good intentions, we use good words, good actions, good intentions, and be about timing, maybe we can get better. But at the end of the day, the white power structure is all about power, and it has no reverence in it. So the step is, just like you've been doing, just like we do it, there's a structure. We have to overwhelm them, not only with the masses, but there has to be such a presence of God, with God speed, God power, and we use it against those people, but we don't use it the same way. It is not a submissive It is of deliberateness and understanding that we are submissive in our bodies of love, and we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable to the masses that need it. We need to overwhelm them people who are on that bullshit. And we need people like you and like Doctor who know how to handle that business. And we need to align this, because at the end of the day, we ain't disagreeing. We all trying to align. What you got, BK?
I'm just trying to figure out how you're going to use that to help us get rid of, eradicate racism, man.
Bruh, that ain't for you to worry about right now. I'm just giving you a glimpse into this God vision right here. You don't worry about that.
But I wanted to make a point to what BK was saying. I think the goal is expectation management.
Ooh,
I think that your question is it misses the point. When the goal is not to get rid of it. It's going to be here. So let's get that off the table. It's going to be here. So getting rid of it may not be the issue. And so if you can write a problem down, you halfway got it solved. So I think it starts with asking the right question. It's not how do we get rid of it. So Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, I don't know if you heard of him. He got a book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? So you're anti it, but at the same time, it's like the end goal of racism is genocide. That's if racism taken to its logical conclusion is genocide, it's Holocaust. That's what we saw in Germany. The end result, if you allow it to go unfeathered, it is massacre. That's what happened with the Indians. That what happened. I can show you Armenia. There's many episodes when the dislike of people ultimately have left unfeathered leads genocide. And I don't think you get rid of it. I think what you end up doing is you find out that your goal is to remove the arguments that support it. The arguments that support it have to be removed. So education has to come before advocacy. If you ain't educated, you can't advocate nothing. So we educate ourselves first. We educate those who are around us. We educate. And I think the reason that we don't talk about this issue enough as it has to be is because it makes people uncomfortable. It makes people uncomfortable because you have to examine yourself first. Like Dr. Ibram Kendi, he's a black dude. He said, you know what? I had to look at myself. And he said, you know what? Because of my background, there are a lot of black people who believe the arguments that racists make. And they end up perpetuating it in their own argument. So I would say the only way a black person to me can be racist is if that black person supports the power of white supremacy in their arguments. And I see that happening all the time. Okay. So the education has to come first. For example, this dude saying black on black crime is a racist term because we don't say white on white crime. So that's thinking. It was that term was created to make us think that black people were more criminal. The idea has to be deconstructed in the mind first. And I think that when we start to see arguments that have racial overtones, if we can't call them out and we support it, we are essentially allowing the status quo to not be challenged. And if we don't challenge arguments that were made by racists, for racists, to support racism, and this is from all colors, all creeds, because like right now, I would say this. I've seen a alarming number of, because white supremacy is not about color. White supremacy is about ideology. Anybody who supports white supremacy ideology, because if they're going to, it's like apartheid South Africa, 10% of the population ruled the 90% because they had access to the wealth and the resources. And if we are talking about this issue, I think the concern becomes we're not trying to challenge individuals, because if I can defeat your argument, you have to get a new one.
Okay.
And see, if I can defeat your argument, then the argument has to be thrown into the dustbin of history, like all the other arguments that were not valid, that can't be substantiated, and we have to call them out. And I think when we start to call these issues out, it's hard, and this is my own personal opinion. It's hard for white people or who classify themselves as white to call out arguments because they benefit from the status quo. Not saying you personally, but there are those who benefit from things not changing because people need security and safety. And my tribe is bigger than your tribe. And ultimately, there is that fear that if Black people in America ever got equality, that Black people would do to white people what they've done to us. But we don't think this way. The question then becomes is, how do we get more equity? How do we get more inclusion? And then ultimately, how do we decolonize from a system that has indoctrinated us into believing that, one, we are inferior, that two, that you don't have supremacy without iconography. I have to control the imagery. I have to tell you that Jesus was a white dude. I have to tell you these things. This is part of the iconography. It's this idea that nothing good in the world came from any Black people. I'm not going to teach you about any Black people in your schools. I'm not going to tell you that Egypt, the Kemet was Black folks and they invented civilization. I'm not going to teach you about how the Moors went over to Europe and civilized them, taught them how to bathe, brought the first universities and colleges to Europe. I can't tell you about that because that might affect your self-image. Because to me, self-image and destruction of self-image is the primary goal of racism.
Oh,
it's the self-image.
All right. Good Lord, man. We got to start charging people for, listen, we at the hour mark, man. So we got to wrap it. BK, we gonna stick around and do our little post. So we're gonna wrap up some things. First of all, I want to thank you for coming out. And I want you to come back because we ain't done. You gonna come back? Thumbs up, thumbs down. You'll be back, maybe. Nah, he'll be back. I'll drag him back. We'll both be bloody, I promise you. Listen, Doc, I appreciate you. So what we're gonna do real quick, we're gonna get out here. Don't worry about it. We do the book money tip. I got it, right? Do you remember that book I told you about? So I'm gonna do the money tip. You do the book tip. You remember the book I just sent you? You knew about? The humane, what it was, the humanity.
Yeah, that's the book.
Yeah. And so my money tip, we filing taxes, people. It's been crazy for the past 2 years. I would say file your taxes like a nun and make monetary moves like a monk because they checking. Okay, that's the money tip. Book tip. What was the book we talked about, Doc?
I'm gonna bring this one up today.
Gotcha.
We talked about it.
Ooh.
How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Very powerful book. And I think when your book was good because I read the background of it. But I will tell you, man, it was the Humanity Archive.
Yeah, that's what it was.
The Humanity Archive.
I read an excerpt from it and I was like, whoa. And then I sent it to you to see if you saw it. So I'm gonna check it out. We can check it out. BK. Hey, last thoughts, BK, man, before we get out here and I put the last finishing touches. Go ahead. You good?
Yeah, I had to unmute my mic. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you good.
Okay. Again, I'm gonna summarize by saying, man, racism is an experience for everybody in a different way, man. I think times have changed. I live in a rough neighborhood, man, and I'm out here every day with the people. And I know from talking to a lot of people and living around a lot of Black people all my life that these days, sometimes the Black man's worst enemy is another Black man. And I know that that's a tough pill to swallow, but these streets are treacherous. And again, I think it's decision making. We make bad decisions as people. We make bad decision making as people. And you said something about worrying about Black people raising up against white people. But Black people are not innately bad. I know I had a big mama. Like, I know so many of the older Black people that they weren't bad people, man. You know what I'm saying? They didn't think like that. So, racism as it's taught is also different, like the way people are taught racism, the way people experience racism is truly the problem. And, I think more Black people hate a system that they know is designed for white people than they do white people, right? I think that's a fact. And honestly, even with a racist system, I don't think that the overwhelming majority of white people are solid racists. Is there white supremacy groups? Is the ideology still alive? Yeah. But I think once we stop saying that it's all or none for these people, that I think we can come together better, man. And I think that's the mission. I think that's how we stop it, man. That would be my final thoughts, man, is that we have to work together to stop racism. You know, if we can't eradicate it, like Doctor said, we can't get rid of it, if we can't kill it, if we can't disassociate from the ideology of racism, then we've got to just do our best to spearhead it, you know, as a people. We've got to work together collectively to do that.
Overwhelm it. All right, man. This is well, I guess we would call it too much sauce. We got a lot of stuff to say, a lot of personality, and it cannot be an hour, but we try. First off, you know, rocking the gear. You know, stop generational trauma. Go get your stuff. You know, Ham got a little something. We're gonna get it together. OAByKJ.com. I want to say I thought of a couple of things that I wrote down before I end this. I say that people should find divine purpose with people before they make people. Sit on that. God is inclusive. Only people who don't believe want to be excluded. All right. So at the end of the day, man, we're just here trying to give it. This is the Lighthouse series. Hey, it's to be a warning or a guide, regardless. Pay attention. We'll be back. You don't know. We'll see. We out here
all day.